Not the military bands, not the trade relays, not the encrypted traffic that drifted through the hidden listening post every night like distant rain against steel. This signal came through a line that had not carried a single pulse in 41 years, a line so deeply buried inside humanity's ghost network that most of the operators on duty did not even know it existed. One moment the chamber beneath the ice of Nereid Station was quiet except for the hum of processors and the slow breathing of exhausted night crews. The next, every light on Console 9 turned white, and the speakers released a sound no one in that room had ever heard before, a child trying not to scream. Lieutenant Ilya Voss froze with his hand halfway to his data slate. The translated words arrived in fragments, broken by static and pressure distortion, but the fear inside them needed no machine to make sense. This record is being transmitted beyond all protected lanes. If you find this, do not come for us. If you are the ones in the buried files, if Earth is real, then they already know enough to keep hunting. Burn this message. Forget our name. Forget this world. The room went dead silent. A second voice replaced the first, older now, strained and whispering over the distant thunder of impacts. Around the translation feed, corrupted visual frames began rebuilding themselves one by one. A city under a violet sky. Towers split open like fruit. Small pale figures running through ash as something enormous moved behind the smoke. Then came the line that made 3 different officers stop breathing at once. They are searching our archives for proof that the predators who protect do exist. If you are a myth, stay a myth. If you are not, then please answer faster than the others did. Voss replayed the message once, then twice, because his mind refused to accept what his body already had. Someone out there had found one of the erased references. Not a rumor, not a distorted battlefield legend, but a direct trail to the one thing humanity had spent 2 generations murdering from every public archive in the galaxy. The idea that on one impossible world, the apex species had learned to answer distress calls instead of causing them. He lifted his eyes toward the dark observation glass above the pit. Behind it, he knew, command staff would already be waking. Algorithms would be stripping metadata. Threat models would be unfolding. Somewhere deeper in the station, old protocols with names no one used aloud would be unlocking one seal at a time. But none of that was the real problem, and Voss knew it before the first alarm finally began to ring. The real problem was the ending. The final seconds of the transmission did not show bombardment or execution or the triumphant roar of conquerors. They showed a hidden chamber beneath a ruined city, walls lined with crystalline memory vaults, and a group of civilians standing shoulder to shoulder in front of them as if their bodies could matter against what was coming. In the center stood a woman with silver markings across her brow, one hand pressed against the transmitter, the other around the shoulders of a child trying not to shake. She looked directly into the recording lens with the exhausted calm of someone who had run out of fear hours ago. Then she said the one sentence humanity had built its silence to avoid hearing. We found out what you were before the galaxy forgot, and that is why they chose us first. The transmission cut to black. 5 seconds later, deep inside Nereid Station, Protocol Shepard opened for the first time in 68 years. The quiet routines of the night shift had vanished under layers of controlled urgency. Security doors locked in sequence throughout the buried complex. Additional encryption fields rolled over the command channels. Names that existed only in redacted training modules were suddenly being spoken in full by people who had spent years pretending they belonged to history rather than policy. The station had always been hidden, but now it was something else entirely. It was awake. Lieutenant Ilya Voss stood in the central operations pit with the recovered transmission hovering above the tactical table in broken bands of violet light. Every time the image of the silver-marked woman reassembled itself, the room seemed to tighten around her. Not because of what she looked like. She was small by human standards, slight, hollow-cheeked, dressed in soot-stained fabric that had once carried ceremonial patterning before war had turned it into rags. It was the look in her eyes that held the room. She had not sent a plea. She had sent an obituary in advance, as if she already understood that rescue was the least likely outcome and memory was the only thing left worth fighting for. "Run it again," Admiral Surya Vale said from the upper ring. No one argued. They never did when Vale used that tone. Voss triggered the playback, and the chamber filled once more with fractured ruin. The city is under bombardment. The distant silhouettes striding through smoke. The hidden chamber. The child. The words. Then black. No beacon signature in known lanes, one analyst reported. Signal bounced through collapsed relay husks and dead navigation buoys. Whoever sent it knew how to make it look like debris noise. Civilian, another officer asked. Not civilian enough to do that by instinct, Vale said. Her voice was cool, but Voss had served under her long enough to hear the shift beneath it. She was not reacting to the massacre. Not first. She was reacting to the method. Someone on that world had known enough about buried communications architecture, historical censorship patterns, and restricted myth clusters to lace a distress signal directly into the one silence humanity had trusted. That was not desperation alone. That was research. Identity. Vale asked. A linguistics specialist enlarged the final frame. Species marker uncertain. They match partial references from erased archive families linked to the old Eastern Rim protectorate disputes. Possible descendants of the Illyri continuum. We thought that branch collapsed 112 years ago. We thought about a lot of things, Vale replied. Voss kept his eyes on the map unfolding over the tactical grid. The source world sat at the edge of a dark commercial scar where 5 minor corridors had once connected outer colonies to richer systems before piracy, warlord fragmentation, and council sanctions had strangled the region into silence. The kind of place respectable powers called unstable when they meant disposable. It lay far outside human public routes, but not outside human notice. Humanity had noticed everything for 68 years. Quietly. Relentlessly. That had been the whole point of the hidden age. But learn. Prepare. Never announce. Never answer unless the alternative was worse. The problem was that the alternative was starting to look very worse. Cross-reference the phrase predators who protect, Vale ordered. A pulse of data leapt across the upper screens. Most results came back shredded, overwritten by the ancient legal scrub that had followed the withdrawal era. But a few fragments survived, scattered through anthropological notes, military myths, and tribunal testimonies that had escaped full erasure only because too few people believed them. Voss watched partial lines snap into view. World spared after siege failure. Unknown heavy infantry extracted juveniles before orbital burn. Predatory bipedal species refused tribute, vanished before council delegation arrival. Warning phrase used by raider cultures. If the protectors smell you, leave the children and run. The room grew quieter with every line. Humanity had spent decades hiding not because it lacked power, but because it had learned what happened when power arrived faster than institutions, faster than trust, faster than the political maturity of the civilizations around it. The first time humans pushed openly beyond soul, the galaxy's reaction had not been simple fear. It had been dependency on one side and extermination planning on the other. Weak worlds had started preying toward Earth before they even built fleets of their own. Strong worlds had begun discussing containment long before they met a single human face-to-face. Humanity had become a symbol before neighbor, myth before ally, weapon before culture. So the architects of the hidden age had made a brutal choice. Disappear from the narrative. Trade direct influence for invisible readiness. Let the galaxy grow without orbiting Earth's shadow. It had sounded wise in doctrine halls. It sounded colder tonight. Sir, an intelligence officer said, looking toward Vale, if this species found archival fragments, others may have too. If this transmission was intercepted before it reached us. It was, Vale said. The room turned toward her. She touched the table, and the map shifted. Red markers appeared like blood droplets across the outer routes. Interception nodes. Radar scrapers. Imperial scan veils. Commercial intelligence nets. Too many. The signal had crossed a graveyard of listening mouths to get here, and there was no chance all of them had stayed closed. Then they know we exist, someone whispered. No, Vale said. They know somebody buried is real. That is worse. Certainty narrows the field. Mystery expands it. Voss felt that it settled into him like ice water. If hostile powers believed a hidden protector civilization existed beyond the censored zones, they would not simply hunt Earth. They would start purging every world, archive, and witness that might confirm where to look. The transmission was not only a plea for help. It was a flare in dry grass. An alarm chimed softly. A new profile appeared above the source world. Designation, Vera's Wake. Status, Commercial Dead Zone, Archive Sanctions, Governance Unresolved. Threat Cluster, Dominion Splinter State known for cultural harvesting, genetic extraction, and memory purges. Voss looked at the data and felt something old and ugly shift in his chest. Cultural harvesting. Genetic extraction. Memory purges. It was never enough for tyrannies to kill. They always wanted the dead to vanish in a way that made resistance look imaginary afterward. Estimated survivors? Vale asked. No stable count. Planetary heat signatures show subterranean clustering under the equatorial ruins. Could be tens of thousands. Could be less. And the hostile force? Mobile occupation fleet, ground reclamation engines, archive breach patterns. They are not just taking territory, Admiral. They are searching. For what? A junior officer asked. No one answered immediately, because the answer hanging over the room was too obvious to say with comfort. Proof. Coordinates. Patterns. History. The road back to Earth. Vale descended from the upper ring and stopped beside Voss. She did not look at him when she spoke, but she knew he was already reading the same conclusion she was. You commanded retrieval operations in the CERT debris famines, she said. Yes, Admiral. You were willing to violate concealment corridors then. I was willing to save children, ma'am. A few heads turned. Dangerous sentences. Honest sentence. At last Vale faced him. There was no softness in her expression, but there was recognition. Good. Because if this goes forward, it will not be a rescue mission in the old sense. It will be contact, exposure, and probably war braided together so tightly no one will separate them afterward. Voss looked once more at the frozen image of the woman in the hidden chamber, her hand on the transmitter, the child under her arm, the certainty in her eyes that help was unlikely and truth was worth dying for anyway. Somewhere on Vera's Wake, if she was still alive, she was waiting inside a silence full of enemies she had probably summoned by trying to reach the only stranger in the galaxy she believed might answer. Then we should go before waiting becomes the thing that kills them, he said. Vale let the quiet hold for one long beat. Then she keyed open the sealed command channel to the fleet vaults beneath Nereid. Activate the Ash Lantern Group, she said. Full dark deployment. No public signatures. No flags. We move in 12 minutes. Across the station, old engines began to wake, and on the tactical display the route to Vera's Wake lit up like a blade drawn in the dark. The Ash Lantern Group departed without ceremony, which was the only way missions like this ever began. No banners unfurled over launch corridors. No fleet-wide speeches rolled across internal channels. There was only the deep vibration of magnetic cradles releasing one warship after another into the dark beyond Nereid's ice shell, and the sight of black hulls slipping into vacuum so cleanly they looked less like vessels than absences in space. From the observation spine of the lead ship, Lieutenant Ilya Voss watched them form on his display in disciplined silence. 9 tactical cruisers, 6 escort darts, 3 medical carriers disguised inside logistics frames, and the long skeletal silhouette of the retrieval arc Mercy of Dawn gliding at the center like a promise no one wanted to say aloud too early. Their transponders remained dead. Their heat signatures were folded inward. Every curve of every hull had been built for the hidden age, for the years when humanity learned to move like rumor instead of empire. Out here, in the unlit arteries beyond the respectable trade lanes, that philosophy made them look supernatural. If anyone saw them at all, it would be too late to understand what they were before the answer arrived. Voss left the spine and descended toward command. On the way, he passed rows of Marines checking Gravrig seals, medics locking down trauma bays, and comm officers feeding corrupted fragments of the distress transmission through predictive reconstruction engines in the hope that some overlooked detail might reveal more about the world they were racing toward. No one spoke louder than necessary. No one moved like this was routine. The ship carried that particular tension born only from missions where secrecy and conscience were on a collision course, and everyone on board understood that one of them would lose. By the time Voss entered the command deck, Admiral Saria Vale had already turned Vera's wake into a layered map of danger. Orbital scans taken from old probe ghosts hovered over live spectrum sweeps. Gravitic distortions marked heavy occupation traffic. Heat blooms flickered where cities had once stood, then vanished under ash and interference. The world itself looked wounded even before magnification brought the truth into focus. Entire population centers had been ringed, breached, and systematically opened from above as if someone were disassembling a civilization to inspect its bones. "Report," Vale said without looking away from the display. "The fleet is in corridor formation. Time to system edge, 3 hours and 11 minutes. Any additional transmissions? None on open bands. But we're catching pulse ghosts." That got her attention. "Natural? I thought so at first." Voss slid data across the table. The signal pattern looked erratic until the pauses were measured instead of the bursts. Then it changed shape. The noise was deliberate. It was being hidden inside crustal instability tremors and ionized debris drift, but once translated through interval logic, it became a crude directional code. Not language. Guidance. Vale's eyes narrowed. "They're still transmitting." "Someone is," Voss said. "And they know enough not to use words anymore." That realization spread around the deck in silence. Whoever had sent the first plea had adapted after exposure. They knew broad-spectrum distress would now be monitored. So instead of crying for help again, they were laying a trail inside the background chaos of a dying world and trusting that only the people they wanted would know to look beneath the surface. It was intelligent. It was disciplined. It was not the work of a broken population waiting passively for rescue. "Source?" Vale asked. "Subsurface. Multiple relay hops under the equatorial ruin belts. The final anchor sits beneath what used to be the city named Alareth." He enlarged the topography. "Or what's left of it." At first glance, Alareth resembled any other occupied city shattered by orbital siege. Towers collapsed inward. Transit webs burned to black scars. Reservoir domes gutted. But as the layers deepened, a different pattern emerged. The destruction above had not been random or purely punitive. The heaviest strikes centered around civic vaults, memorial chambers, universities, monasteries, and archive towers. The invaders had hit infrastructure, yes, but they had hit memory harder. "They're not cleansing the population first," Vale said quietly. "They're cleansing continuity." One of the intelligence officers pulled up occupation doctrine on the hostile force now identified with greater confidence. The Vorak hegemony, a splinter dominion risen out of the old predator leagues beyond sanctioned space. Unlike conventional conquerors, the Vorak did not simply absorb worlds. They harvested them. Useful labor was sorted. Useful biology was extracted. Useful culture was stripped, rewritten, or sold. Anything capable of preserving identity independent of subjugation was considered a long-term threat. So schools burned. Histories vanished. Names were replaced. A species survived physically if it had value, but spiritually it became inventory. Voss had seen that pattern before. Once in the Cert debris famines, where pirate kings had controlled food by deleting inheritance records until whole populations no longer knew which ships, habitats, or children belonged to whom. Again on the Heliot fringe, where a raider state had melted temple archives because prayers anchored rebellion better than weapons. The Vorak were not innovating. They were perfecting an old cruelty. If you could erase memory quickly enough, resistance eventually began to feel like superstition. And somewhere under those ruins, a woman with silver markings had gambled her life on the possibility that humanity had once been the exception. "Admiral," a signal tech said sharply. "We've got visual." The deck lights dimmed as a reconstructed feed surfaced over the table. It was unstable, grainy, taken from a moving source in near total dark. Stone walls. Broken lumens. Faces appearing and vanishing in the frame as people ran. Pale skin marked with ash. Large eyes reflecting emergency lamps. Children carried, elders supported, data slates clutched tighter than food packs. It could have been any evacuation until the camera turned and fixed for a single breath on what they were carrying through the underground passage behind them. Crystalline cylinders. Dozens of them. Have spines. They were not fleeing with valuables. They were fleeing with history. The frame jolted. A voice whispered in a language the auto-translator struggled to keep up with. Don't panic this time. Instruction. Turn left at the broken choir. Keep the 7th vault dry. If the ceiling breaks, save the witness lattice first. The image swung again, and for half a second the sender came into focus. The same woman from the distress transmission, though she looked older now than even a few hours of terror should have made her. Her silver brow markings were smeared with blood. One arm was bound in torn cloth. The child remained with her, still close, still silent, but no longer frozen. The child was carrying one of the smaller archive cylinders with both arms wrapped around it like a sacred burden. Then the feed died. No one on the bridge moved. Recovered from pulse ghosts? Vale asked. Yes, Admiral, the text said. Embedded in the direction codes. She's giving us route fragments and status in the only way she thinks won't expose them. Voss stared at the dead frame and felt the mission change shape in his mind. Until this moment, Vera's wake had been a rescue objective and a strategic threat. Now it was something sharper. Someone below understood exactly what was dying if the archives were lost. Not just a city. Not just a species. A chain of testimony. Witnesses to something the Vorak feared and the galaxy had tried to forget. As if called by the thought, another file opened from Deep Trawl historical correlation. This one came from a tribunal cache believed destroyed 70 years earlier. Most of it was corrupted beyond use, but a few lines survived. Predatory protector intervention confirmed in the Taylor expulsions. Unidentified bipedal heavy worlders broke siege, evacuated juveniles, refused annexation rights. Council recommendation: suppress event classification to prevent protector myth proliferation among peripheral species. The words settled over the bridge like frost. The protectors smell you. The world no predators could invade twice. Staying a myth. If you are not, answer faster than the others did. Voss now understood what made the transmission so dangerous. The woman in the underground chamber had not found a rumor about Earth. She had found evidence of a pattern. Somewhere in the censored centuries, worlds under extermination had been saved by an unnamed force that arrived, refused tribute, broke the aggressors, and disappeared before political systems could formalize what had happened. Humanity had not merely hidden itself from fear. It had hidden the possibility that power could intervene without conquest. That idea was infectious. To the weak, it created hope. To tyrants, it created panic. The Vorak were not simply searching archives for coordinates. They were hunting proof that hope had a source. System edge in 21 minutes, navigation reported. Veil straightened. Bring all ships to combat cold. No emissions beyond shadow bands. I want eyes on every orbital asset before they see so much as a thermal ripple from us. A sensor net unfolded across the command display as the Ash Lantern group glided toward Vera's wake. One by one, hostile signatures emerged from the noise. Vorak cutters. Occupation platforms. Breach barges positioned over civic districts. Interdiction satellites stitched through the upper atmosphere. More ships than the first estimate suggested, and arranged not as a standard blockade but as a cage. The world was not being looted in passing. It was being held open while something underneath was searched sector by sector. Then a new contact appeared near the equatorial ruins. Convoy movement descending toward the subsurface zones. Vale saw it at the same time Voss did. Magnify. The image sharpened. Ground carriers. Drill walkers. Shock troops. Too many for random sweep action, too concentrated for routine suppression. They were converging on the exact region from which the pulse ghosts had originated. They've found the tunnel web, Voss said. Or they were led there, Vale replied. He looked at her. You think the transmission trail was bait? I think either the woman below is smarter than we hoped, or the enemy above is smarter than we assumed. Before he could answer, another pulse ghost surfaced, weaker than the last, almost buried beneath atmospheric churn. It translated into only 6 words before dissolving. Not much time. They are below now. Across the command deck, the tactical board flashed as the Vorak convoy split into 3 descending vectors, all pointed at the undercity beneath Alarith. Whoever was still alive in those tunnels was about to be trapped between a hunt from above and a collapse from within. Rescue had already become impossible in the clean sense. Extraction under concealment was gone. The delay was gone. Whatever happened next would happen under the eyes of an enemy determined to seize the witnesses before humanity could reach them. Vale's voice cut through the silence like drawn steel. Battle stations. The ship answered her with a rising pulse of power, and on the dead world below, beneath ash and broken stone, the last keepers of a forgotten truth were about to discover whether the myth they had gambled everything on had truly come. The first human shots fired over Vera's wake were not meant to kill. They were meant to arrive before fear did. As the Ash Lantern group slid out of concealment above the planet's equatorial ruin belt, the Vorak occupation grid reacted exactly as Admiral Saria Vale had predicted and exactly as she had feared. Targeting cones swept upward through the ash-loaded upper atmosphere. Orbital platforms pivoted in stunned delay, then snapped toward the black silhouettes that had no right to be there, as if the crews manning them needed one extra breath to believe their senses before they believed their own terror. Humanity had spent 68 years mastering that moment. The instant before recognition. The fraction of time when an enemy saw something impossible and had not yet chosen which lie would make it less dangerous. Vale did not waste it. The lead tactical cruisers dropped tungsten veil pods instead of missiles, scattering millions of conductive flecks across the lower orbital lanes. Within seconds, Vorak targeting webs degraded into static storms and false reflections. 2 occupation satellites vanished behind clouds of blinding interference. A third tried to correct and lost its firing solution entirely when one of the human escort darts accelerated across its scope in a turn that would have pulpified almost any known crew species. The point was not destruction. Not yet. The point was to break the rhythm of slaughter below and create a corridor wide enough for the wounded world to breathe. Surface windows opening, a sensor officer called. On the main tactical display, 3 breach zones lit green through Alaretha's ruin fields. Beneath them, thermal clusters shifted as tunnel populations began moving. Voss watched the data with his jaw tight. The civilians below had not panicked when the interference hit. They had moved according to pre-planned routes, redirecting from compromised chambers into older utility veins that did not exist on any surviving public map. Whoever had organized the underground network had prepared for this kind of chaos long before humanity arrived. That meant discipline. It meant leadership. It also meant the Vorak were not hunting blind. They had been pressuring the tunnels for enough time to force the defenders into adaptation. Then the enemy commander introduced himself. Every tactical surface on the bridge flared amber as an open band transmission overrode the local jamming. The figure that filled the center display was broad-shouldered, gray-scaled, and draped in layered war armor made less for protection than intimidation. His face was wedge-narrow and old with scars. Gold hooks pierced the cartilage along his jawline like trophies hammered into living flesh. Behind him, through the angled viewport of his command barge, Voss could see the burning hemisphere of Vera's wake and a row of kneeling captives lined under armed guard. I speak for War Executor Threx Carr. The translation rendered in a voice too calm to be civilized. Unknown fleet, you arrived faster than the councils, slower than we hoped, and exactly as our archivists predicted. His yellow eyes fixed on the camera with predatory amusement. You hide yourselves well for creatures so burdened by conscience. No one on the bridge spoke. Vale simply watched. Threx Carr lifted one clawed hand, and the feed widened. The kneeling captives came fully into view. Pale-skinned, ash-streaked, wrists bound. Among them were 2 adolescents, 1 elder, and a figure with silver markings across the brow. Voss stepped toward the display before he realized he was moving. It was not the woman from the original signal, but the resemblance was close enough to strike like a blow. Same people. Same ceremonial lineage, perhaps. Same deliberate posture despite the rifles at their backs. Threx Carr noticed the shift in human stillness and smiled without warmth. That is better. Now I know I am speaking to the correct species. Admiral, a comms officer warned quietly, he's transmitting system-wide. Vale's expression did not change, but Voss felt the implication hit the deck like a pressure wave. This was no private challenge. The Vorak commander was broadcasting across any trade scavenger, pirate relay, council monitor, or intelligence net close enough to listen. He was not trying to stop humanity from acting. He was trying to force humanity to reveal itself while the galaxy watched. We have spent months excavating this little world, Threx Carr continued. At first we believed these archive keepers were merely preserving lineage myths. Then we found references to a species erased from useful records. Heavy world predators. Siege breakers. A person who leaves before gratitude can become dependent. His eyes narrowed. Do you know what I learned from that? Not that you are noble. Predators are never noble. I learned that your weakness is old and reliable. Show you the helpless, and you step into the trap yourself. A blade of silence ran across the bridge. Below the war executor's image, the tactical feed updated in cold red. Additional Vorak guns were opening across the surface, not at random urban sectors now, but around the newly exposed civilian routes the human interference screen had made possible. Kill zones. Deliberate and visible. Threx Carr had adjusted instantly. He was weaponizing the human instinct to protect by forcing every rescue decision into public view. Save one route, another burns. Shield one district, another becomes an example. Every act of mercy would now reveal tactical preference, range limits, movement doctrine, moral priorities. He was learning humanity by watching where it refused to let children die. We can end this with efficiency, Threx Carr said. Withdraw beyond my orbit and I will preserve a population sample. Resist, and I strip this city layer by layer until your ghosts stop making promises through dead channels. Voss saw it then, hidden behind the warlord's shoulder near the command viewport. Not a random symbol, not decoration. A crystalline archive spine mounted inside a display cradle. Intact. Recovered. The Vorak were not merely searching ruins for coordinates anymore. They were extracting witness records and carrying them into orbit for analysis. Vale finally spoke. Her voice was level enough to chill blood. You have mistaken restraint for leverage. Threx Carr laughed softly. No. I have done nothing. I know exactly what you are. I only wish to know whether the stories improved with age. The transmission cut, and the bridge erupted into layered motion. Surface batteries reorienting. 3 new firing lanes over the refugee tunnels. Executor barge is pulling higher orbit behind platform cover. He wants us to split, Voss said. He wants us to be emotional, Vale corrected. That was the harder truth. Anyone could see the military trap. But Threx Carr was betting on something deeper than reaction time. He was betting that if humanity's first appearance before the wider galaxy came under conditions of mass helplessness, humans would expose everything rather than tolerate a visible atrocity. He was probably right. The only question was how much they could reveal without turning themselves from myth into a strategic map. Vale's hand moved across the tactical table, opening layers of geometry only senior command was supposed to touch in real time. Gravitic lanes. Descent arcs. Shield bloom tolerances. Human ships did not dwarf the Vorak platforms in size. They did not need to. They were built dense, compact, brutal in ways most alien engineering considered biologically irrational. Earth's gravity had made elegance a luxury humans rarely trusted. Every vessel in Ash Lantern carried that philosophy in its bones. Deploy rescue spears to breach zones 2 and 4, Vale ordered. Mercy of Dawn stays masked until I say otherwise. Tactical cruisers hold high cover and strip surface artillery by sequence, not by spread. I want precision dominance, not spectacle. Admiral, one of the civilian liaisons said, if we prioritize precision, some of the exposed routes won't hold. Vale looked at the casualty simulations for half a second too long. I know. That was the shape of command at its cruelest. Not indifference. Arithmetic with names inside it. The first dropships entered the atmosphere under jamming fog and burning debris. Voss moved to tactical support, hands flying across the retrieval grid as the surface feed sharpened. Alareth rose through the ash like the skeleton of an extinguished cathedral. Streets split by bombardment. Tower stumps smoldering against the violet sky. Vorak drill walkers stamping through plazas that had once held markets and civic processions. Human spearcraft knifed between them so fast the ground cameras barely kept pace, their hulls black against orange fire, thrusters tearing dust cyclones down ruined avenues. Then the first impossible maneuver happened, and with it the hidden age truly started to die. A Vorak artillery column rotated toward a flood of civilians emerging from a shattered transit vault. The firing angle was clean. The crowd had nowhere to run. For one suspended second, Voss saw the future the enemy wanted: public slaughter, human hesitation, strategic paralysis. Instead, one of the spearcraft came down almost vertically, turning through a descent vector that should have liquefied its pilots, and dropped between the artillery and the civilians at the last possible heartbeat. Its shields flared white-blue under impact, not collapsing, not buckling, just absorbing punishment long enough for its side hatches to slam open and armored human marines to pour out into the street through smoke and broken glass. The surface cameras caught everything. Humans moving through the killing zone as if gravity itself favored them. Broad-shouldered in matte combat frames, not monstrous but unmistakably built for a world that demanded muscle just to stand. Their formation spread without shouted order. 2 Marines braced a fallen archway to let children scramble underneath. Another lifted a wounded civilian one-handed while firing with the other. A medic sprinted straight into open line of sight to shield an elder with her own body before dragging him behind the dropship's landing strut. Their speed was not elegant by council standards. It was relentless, dense, grounded, impossible to intimidate. Across the bridge, a sensor analyst whispered the thing no one wanted said aloud. The whole system can see this. They could. Every trader scavenging the outskirts. Every pirate relay. Every council algorithm tuned for anomalies. They could see the unknown heavy world predators from censored myth descending into a live extermination zone, not to conquer, not to claim tribute, but to physically stand between prey and predator with a ferocity so direct it almost looked ancient. Another feed came online from Breach Zone 4. This one showed a human escort dart skim so low over a Vorak mechanized phalanx that its wake sheared plating off the lead walkers. Before the wreckage settled, local defenders burst from hidden side channels beneath the street, pale-skinned civilians armed with improvised shock tools and archive cases strapped to their backs, moving in disciplined tandem with the human strike pattern as if they had understood the rescue signal the moment it arrived. That shook Voss more than the combat did. The people below were not waiting to be saved anymore. They were adapting in motion, turning help into resistance. Signal from subsurface node, a calm text said suddenly. Direct. Clean enough for voice. Vale nodded once. Patch it. The bridge filled with static, then breath, then a woman's voice carrying exhaustion like a cracked blade. This is Archivist Lyra Sin of Alareth Witness House. A pause, short and controlled. If you are the fleet I think you are, the enemy has already breached 3 lower memory chambers. They are searching for lattices labeled with the old Protector incidents. They do not yet know the primary witness vault was moved. But they will. Voss felt the room focus around the name. Lyra Senator not dead. Not captured. Still leading. We can reach your sector, Vale said. Can you move your people? We can move some. Not all. The answer came without self-pity. The children and the living archives are already in split columns. I stayed behind with the decoy records. On the bridge display, a subsurface map blossomed from the coordinates Lyra sent. Hidden corridors. Flooded service arteries. Choir chambers repurposed into triage. And deep below all of it, a chamber marked with a symbol the auto-translators could not resolve. What is that vault? Voss asked before he checked himself. Static filled the channel for a beat. When Lyra answered, the fatigue in her voice gave way to something harder. The reason they chose us first. Before anyone could press her, every warning system on the bridge lit at once. New mass signatures were entering the system edge. Additional Vorak ships, heavier than the occupation craft, dropping from dark transit with weapons hot and transponders open. Threk's car had never intended to win with the force already present. He had only needed enough brutality to hold the witnesses in place until humanity showed itself. Now that it had, the second net was closing. Vale's eyes stayed on the tactical bloom as red multiplied around Vera's wake, and the first reports of galactic observer probes entering long-range scan distance began to stack across her board. Rescue had become an exposure. Exposure was becoming judgment. And somewhere beneath a dying city, in a vault marked by a symbol no human system recognized, lay a truth powerful enough that an empire had burned a world to reach it before humanity could. The second Vorak wave did not rush the planet. That was the first sign the battle had become something larger than a siege. As the new mass signatures resolved across high orbit, the tactical displays on Admiral Surya Vale's bridge filled with vessel profiles that did not match the occupation architecture below. These were not drill barges, suppression carriers, or archive raiders retrofitted for planetary terror. These were line breakers. Fleet killers. Long-shouldered warships with layered armor, spinal launch systems, and enough engine mass to drag an entire engagement into close-range brutality whether the opponent wanted it or not. Threk's car had called them in only after humanity revealed itself, which meant the world beneath them had never been his true center of gravity. Vera's wake had been bait. Not because its people were unimportant to him. Predators did not waste effort on the unimportant. He had spent months breaking the world because he believed something valuable was hidden in its memory vaults. But the timing of the reinforcements made his deeper aim impossible to miss now. He had needed a public atrocity severe enough to force the unknown protectors into the open, visible enough to expose their instincts, and urgent enough to make them choose conscience over concealment. The people of Vera's wake had not been random victims caught inside Imperial expansion. They had been selected, isolated, and hunted because the records they protected might draw the one species the Vorak feared more than any fleet. Humanity. Reinforcement vector holds beyond planetary intercept for now, a sensor officer reported. They're not pressing surface support. They're forming outer net geometry. Vale studied the expanding red arcs in silence. Because they are not here to win the occupation. They're here to close the box once we commit. Voss understood immediately. Threk's car's ground war had been a scalpel. This incoming fleet was a lid. If Ash Lantern Group threw everything into the surface rescue, the Vorak would lock the system, cut off escape corridors, and force a prolonged battle under observation. If Vale disengaged to preserve fleet survival, the underground witnesses would be overrun and the vault beneath Alareth would be taken. Neither outcome served the war executor. Humanity would either reveal too much or abandon too many. For a species built on answering the helpless, it was a cruelly elegant trap. Surface feeds continued to roll in across the tactical wall. Human marines were still carving pathways through the ruined city. Spearcraft were dragging survivors out of exposed transit wounds. Vorak artillery was falling silent one battery at a time. On the ground, Ash Lantern was winning. In orbit, the real problem was just arriving. "Patch me to Lyrason," Vale said. The response came through after 2 seconds of static and subterranean interference. "I am here." Her voice sounded more distant now, the air around her full of stone dust and movement. Behind the words, Voss could hear overlapping footfalls, urgent whispers, something metallic scraping over rock. She was still in motion, still working, still refusing to die at a convenient moment. "Your vault," Vale said. "No omissions this time. What exactly are they trying to find?" For the first time since contact, Lyra did not answer immediately. Not because she did not know. Because she was deciding whether to trust humanity with the truth her people had apparently been preserving at the cost of extinction. When she spoke, the restraint in her voice had changed. It was no longer the measured tone of a survivor passing coordinates to rescuers. It was the tone of someone opening a sealed chamber that had never been meant for strangers. "My people were not chosen first because we were weakest," she said. "We were chosen because we remember you wrong in the way tyrants fear most. We remember you accurately." Silence settled across the bridge. The official archives of this region say the Protector events were false attributions, Lyra continued. Mass hysteria. Unknown mercenaries. Fabricated rescue myths used by frontier populations to justify military expansion. That lie is old, and most species accepted it because the alternative was harder to live with. The alternative was that a predatory heavy-world species intervened in extermination campaigns, destroyed fleets, evacuated civilians, and then refused territory, tribute, and worship before disappearing. Your withdrawal made the lie easier to preserve. But some witness houses were built precisely to keep what governments erased. She transmitted a file burst. Ancient lattice scans bloomed over the tactical table in ghost pale blue. Fragmentary at first, then sharper. Tribunal recordings. Evacuation manifests. Grainy battlefield images from centuries-old sensor crystals. A massive bipedal silhouette carrying two alien juveniles through smoke while artillery detonated behind it. A human dropship lifting from a shattered desert world while local defenders saluted from below. A line from a council suppression memo stamped in obsolete legal script. Protector narrative proliferation among peripheral species presents long-term compliance risk. Voss felt his chest tighten, not from surprise, but from the brutal clarity of it. Humanity had not merely been hidden out of self-preservation. It had been politically excised because the idea of an overwhelmingly dangerous species using its power without annexation destabilized every predatory order in the galaxy. Tyrannies depended on a simple lesson repeated across generations. Power always arrives to own. If that lesson broke, if weaker worlds began believing a stronger force might come only to help and then leave, fear lost some of its grip. Obedience became harder to extract. Despair became less reliable. Hope, then, was the contraband. And Vera's wake had been a warehouse full of it. The Vorak found references to the witness houses, Lyra said. Not coordinates to Earth. Not yet. They found proof that Protector incidents were repeated across centuries and regions too distant to be coincidence. That terrified them more than your existence alone. Vale's eyes narrowed. Because repeated intervention suggests doctrine. Yes. Because doctrine suggests values. And values spread faster than weapons. There was. The midpoint turn, brutal and clean. This war was not about location. Not really. It was not even about one world. The Vorak were trying to kill a pattern before it re-entered galactic consciousness. If humanity became known merely as strong, other powers would plan around that. If humanity became known as strong and unwilling to let extermination stand, then every species living under the shadow of predation would begin sending calls into the dark. Not because humans could rule them, because humans might not. That was more destabilizing than the Empire. Admiral, intelligence said sharply, the reinforcement fleet is broadcasting traffic to external nets. Fragments only, but enough to spike interest. Observer drones multiplying at the system edge. Of course they were. Threk's car wanted witnesses. He wanted the galaxy to see humans cornered by their own morality and dragged into permanence. The war executor was not only trying to destroy a fleet. He was trying to force a strategic identity crisis large enough that humanity could never vanish again. On the surface, a new emergency burst across the display. Vorak ground teams had cracked a lower decoy chamber and found it false. Their formation shifted instantly toward deeper tunnel strata, drilling through support walls rather than pursuing refugee concentrations. Lyra's earlier deception had bought time, but not enough. They're adapting, Voss said. They know the primary vault is still below city depth. Not exactly where, Lyra answered, but close enough now. Vale leaned toward the channel. What is inside that vault besides evidence of old Protector events? The answer came low. A choice your species made, Lyra said. And the reason our witness houses survived when others failed. Voss exchanged a glance with Vale. Go on. Our oldest records do not merely show that humans intervened, Lyra said. They show why humans stopped. That hit harder than expected. For years, the Hidden Age had been explained within human command structures as a strategic necessity. Appear too early and the galaxy either fears you into war or depends on you into stagnation. Withdraw. Prepare. Endure. But hearing an alien witness house say it had preserved the external version of that choice was something else entirely. Humanity had not hidden only because it was threatened. It had hidden because after a certain point, rescued civilizations stopped building themselves. They began orienting around the possibility of Earth. Local coalitions weakened. Defense compacts frayed. Political courage atrophied. Why bleed to protect your own world if the Deathworlders might come? Why confront a tyrant if some greater predator hated tyrants more? Humanity, in saving too effectively, had started bending civilizations into dependence without ever asking for it. We preserve a transmission from the final protector conclave in this region, Lyra said. A human commander refused permanent guardianship and said something our ancestors believed was sacred enough to hide with our dead. If we stay long enough, you stop needing yourselves. After that, your species began disappearing from the record by design. Some of us understood the mercy in that. Others called it abandonment. But all of us remembered. The bridge had gone utterly still. The twist was bigger than history. It was moral. Humanity's greatest act of protection had not been intervention. It had been leaving before gratitude calcified into orbit. Leaving so the saved could become strong without kneeling forever toward the sky. And now, by answering Vera's wake publicly, humanity risked breaking its own wisdom. Admiral, one of the civilian strategy aides said carefully, if this goes wide, every minor species under threat will call us. Every coalition too weak to defend itself will call us. Every government that wants legitimacy without sacrifice will call us. Yes, Vale said. And if we answer all of them, we become gravity. Nobody on the bridge liked hearing it phrased that way because it was true. A new alert cut through the silence before the weight of it could settle too deeply. Not from the planet. From the outer dark. Long-range telemetry flagged a separate vector detaching from the reinforcement line and accelerating hard, not toward Ash Lantern, not toward Vera's Wake's upper orbit, but away from both on a masked burn along a corridor only a strategist would notice. Voss was first to catch the implication. That's not a flank. That's a courier route. Intelligence magnified the trajectory. It aimed toward a chain of dead relay bodies and hidden mass shadows leading, with careful jumps, toward one of the veiled approach regions used by human outer logistics. Not Earth directly, but close enough to begin unraveling where Earth might be. Threk's car had already decided the planet below was secondary now. He had enough proof. Humanity has revealed itself, its instincts, and fragments of its capability. The next priority was getting that knowledge out alive. He wants the galaxy to know where to look, Voss said. He wants every predator with ambition to start triangulating, Vale corrected. And suddenly the trap widened beyond Vera's wake. This was no longer a question of one rescue or one fleet. If that courier escaped with sensor profiles, doctrine patterns, and confirmation that witness house records were real, then every hidden corridor humanity relied upon would become vulnerable. Home would not be found tomorrow. But the hunt would begin everywhere. Vale's orders came instantly. Detach the Night Lance pair. Burn after that courier. Silence it before it clears debris shadow. No broadcasts. Admiral, tactically warned, if we split more assets, surface extraction windows narrow below survival threshold. Another impossible equation. Save the witnesses or protect the road home. Preserve the hidden network or preserve the people who proved why it mattered. On the channel, Lyra spoke again, and there was no panic in her now. Only the exhaustion of someone who had lived long enough with impossible choices to recognize one on contact. You cannot save everything, she said quietly. That is why your kind left before. We know this. We kept the record because we knew one day the test would return. Voss looked at the latest surface scans. Refugee tunnels collapsing in 2 sectors. Marines are still buying minutes with blood and momentum. The symbol-marked deep vault waiting under stone older than the city above it. And above all of it, the spreading realization that if humanity answered too completely, it might become the very center around which the galaxy stopped learning how to stand. Then a secondary surface feed flashed to life. A human strongpoint in the northern ruins, temporary med-zone, evac staging, mostly civilians and wounded, vanished under a precision orbital strike from one of the newly arrived Vorak line breakers. Fire climbed through the city like a vertical dawn. Shockwaves rolled across 3 districts. For one suspended second, even the bridge forgot to breathe. Threk's car had made his answer. If he could not reach the vault first, he would force humanity to choose under maximum pain. Vale straightened, her face hardening into something colder than anger. New priorities. Surface defense expands. Courier dies. The vault team goes in now. Admiral, Voss said, already knowing. Her eyes found him. You're taking the descent element. He did not hesitate. Understood. Beneath them, Vera's wake kept burning. Behind them, the road home was beginning to glow under enemy attention. And far below the ruined city, in a sealed chamber carrying the memory of why humanity had once walked away from gratitude, waited for a truth powerful enough to make both rescue and retreat feel dangerous in entirely different ways. The descent to the deep vault began while the city above it was still on fire. Lieutenant Ilya Voss rode inside a spearcraft stripped for tunnel insertion, its interior lit only by red tactical wash and the intermittent flicker of incoming telemetry. Around him sat 12 Marines in sealed grav frames, 2 combat engineers, 1 field medic, and a systems archivist named Rana Holt who had insisted on joining the descent because, in her words, if the Vorak were burning worlds for historical proof, then somebody needed to understand exactly what they were trying to steal before everyone else died protecting the wrong box. No one had argued with her. In the last 9 minutes, the situation had evolved beyond neat categories like military necessity and civilian expertise. Vera's wake was now a battlefield, an archive, a warning, and possibly the first crack in the entire logic of the Hidden Age. On the tactical strip hovering above Voss's knee, the system was divided into 3 simultaneous emergencies. High orbit was tightening as the Vorak reinforcement fleet completed its outer net, trying to force Ash Lantern Group into a defensive sphere that would keep human ships trapped close to the planet. At the same time, the courier vessel that had broken for the debris shadows was running dark and fast, with the Night Lance pair in pursuit through a field dense enough to blind ordinary weapons. And below all of it, in the subterranean anatomy of Alareth, Lyra Sen's network was collapsing inward under relentless pressure as Vorak breach teams chewed through civic foundations one level at a time. No single victory could solve all 3. That, Voss realized, was the real pressure point Threk's car had designed. Not just danger. Concurrency. Humanity was strongest when it could bring total attention to a crisis and break it through discipline, speed, and density of force. Here, every moral imperative had been split across different altitudes. Save the witnesses below and you risked losing the road home. Preserve the hidden corridors and civilians died in the ruins. Hold the fleet together and the vault fell. Split too much and all of it failed at once. The spearcraft cut hard through a shaft of smoke and plunged between the broken ribs of a collapsed amphitheater. The city came into view beneath them in jagged, burning fragments. Alareth no longer looked like architecture. It looked like memory after violence had finished rearranging it. Choir spires lay across public squares. Skybridges twisted above streets filled with shattered statuary and blown masonry. Human dropships flashed between plumes of dust while Vorak ground armor repositioned through the ruins in coordinated hunting lines. Every few seconds, another tremor rolled through the district as something beneath the city gave way under drill pressure. The landing zone was compromised, the pilot reported. Switching to anchor drop. Voss gripped the side rail as the spearcraft skimmed over what had once been the central archive forum. There, in the middle of the devastation, he saw the temporary human strongpoint that had taken the orbital hit minutes earlier. Half the plaza was gone. Medical tents burned in collapsed heaps. A logistics carrier lay split open, its black hull peeled back like torn skin. And still people moved through the wreckage. Marines dragging wounded. Civilians carrying supply crates. Medics setting up under broken colonnades because there was nowhere else left to go. The strike had not shattered the rescue effort. It had made it angrier. For one moment, Voss understood the danger of that more clearly than ever. This was the image that would spread if humanity stayed visible long enough. Not just power. Not just predatory efficiency. The insane, almost offensive refusal to stop helping even after being hit in the mouth by orbiting warships. To some species, it would look like salvation. To others, it would look like the arrival of a force so morally stubborn it could destabilize any system built on acceptable levels of cruelty. The spearcraft halted over a location in the stone where Lyra's route markers converged. Anchor lines fired. Voss and the team descended into darkness while the ship surged away under incoming tracer fire. The air below was colder than the burning streets above should have allowed. Dust drifted in pale veils through the beam cones of human helmets. The breech shaft opened into a slanted transit chamber lined with cracked mosaics and fallen bells, every surface marked by hurried movement. The civilians who had fled this way had not gone in blind panic. They had organized by burden. Water caches stacked against the walls. Medical wrappings bundled in coded colors. Archive cylinders nested in shock cloths beside evacuation arrows scratched directly into the stone. Someone had prepared this withdrawal as carefully as a campaign. They built continuity into retreat, Holt murmured, scanning the markings. That's not just survival behavior. That's preservation doctrine. Voss nodded once and signaled the team forward. They moved quickly through the old Undercity, following Lyra's route pulses as they flickered across their maps. The lower they went, the more obvious it became that the Vorok were no longer trying to exterminate at a distance. They were anatomizing the city. Blast cuts opened through sanctum walls. Bore rigs gnawed into supporting pillars. Small hunter units moved in disciplined triads, less interested in chasing refugees now than in isolating chambers with archival density. Twice the Marines intercepted enemy scouts before alarms could fully spread. Each fight was vicious and short. In the tunnels, human advantages became brutally intimate. Higher gravity musculature. Faster acceleration out of cover. More stable recoil control in broken footing. The Vorok were stronger by appearance, plated and broad with natural intimidation built into their bodies. But in close quarters against humans trained on heavier worlds, intimidation had a habit of becoming decorative. Halfway to the vault corridor, the first major reversal hit. A coded burst from orbit flashed across Voss's visor, tight beam from Admiral Vale. Night Lance had intercepted the courier route, but only partially. They destroyed one vessel and crippled the second, yet before the kill another burst packet escaped through debris bouncing toward outer listening webs. Contents unknown. Reach unknown. Enough got out to matter. Home had not been exposed. Not fully. But the hunt had widened. Before Voss could process it, another update followed from the fleet. More non-combatant signals were appearing beyond the system edge. Not Council warships. Not Vorok reinforcements. Civilian and minor state traffic. Some were observer drones, some scavenger relays, and some, most dangerously, were petitions. Distress signatures. Primitive, broad, barely authenticated. Someone out there had already seen enough of what was happening over Vera's wake to start asking the same question the galaxy had once been forced to bury. If the protectors were real, would they answer? The messages were not meant for Ash Lantern. They were not even routed correctly. But they existed, and their existence landed in Voss like a warning shot from history. The problem Lyra had described was already starting. Hope had an address again, and it was spreading before this battle was even won. The team reached a fractured junction where the tunnel network widened around a subterranean reservoir. There they found the survivors. Not all of them. Perhaps 60, clustered under collapsed stone and emergency lamps, guarded by a rear cell of local defenders wearing mining harnesses, ceremonial strips, and improvised shock weapons. At their center stood Lyra Sin, exactly as the transmission had suggested and somehow more severe in person than any hologram could capture. Her silver brow markings were cut by dried blood, one sleeve dark with soot, but she stood straight despite the tremors running through the chamber. Beside her, holding a compact crystalline cylinder against a narrow chest, was the same child from the signal. For half a second neither side moved. Then Lyra looked at the human armor, the weapons, the density of posture that made even still Marines seem difficult to displace, and something in her face gave way, not fear, not relief, but recognition so old it almost felt inherited. "You came in person," she said softly. "We're not leaving with stories," Voss replied. "We're leaving with you." A brittle sound echoed from deeper in the dark. Not collapse. Mechanical impact. Lyra's expression tightened. "Then there is less time than I hoped. They breached the lower decoys 6 minutes ago. The primary chamber is beyond that wall." She turned, pointing toward an arched corridor half hidden by fallen stone. "But if you open it, you must understand what you are talking about." Holt stepped forward. "The conclave transmission?" Lyra shook her head. "More than that. Proof that your species did not merely withdraw. You left instructions." Voss frowned. "Instructions for whom?" "For us," Lyra said. "For any witness house that survived long enough to remember what protection was supposed to mean." The chamber trembled again, harder this time. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Down the far tunnel, Vorak-cutting beams began to score through stone, turning darkness orange by degrees. Behind Voss, one of his marines checked the narrowing approach lanes and spoke the truth nobody wanted softened. "Lieutenant, if we hold this position and crack the vault, enemy convergence hits in under 4 minutes. If we move the civilians now and skip the chamber, we might still get them topside alive. Another impossible split. Save the people or save the meaning." Lyra looked at Voss with a steadiness that made the choice worse, not easier. "If the vault dies, more worlds burn later. If we die and it lives, then at least the pattern survives." Above them, across the system, the first crude petitions to Earth were still multiplying. Ahead of them, the wall to the primary chamber waited under centuries of concealment. And behind the stone, if Lyra was right, humanity had once left a message not about how to depend on protectors, but how to stop needing them before the predators returned. Lieutenant Ilya Voss had been trained to recognize the moment a mission stopped being about success and started being about identity. It never announced itself cleanly. There was no dramatic pause in the fighting, no silence between alarms, no single order that carried enough weight to define it. The shift came the way pressure cracks appeared in deep glass, suddenly visible only after the strain had already spread everywhere. 1 minute you were still thinking about objectives, casualties, angles, extraction windows. The next you were staring at a decision that would outlive everyone in the room. The wall to the primary chamber stood before them in dust and dim emergency light, its stone surface inlaid with silver-black lines too deliberate to be decorative and too old to belong to the upper city. Behind Voss, the survivors of Vera's wake clustered in disciplined stillness around the last portable archive spines, not panicking, not begging, because fear had already spent itself in them and left only purpose. To his right, Rana Holt knelt beside the sealed seam, scanning the lattice with increasing disbelief. To his left, the Marines were repositioning into a killing crescent at the tunnel mouths, their movements economical and calm, though everyone knew the Vorak were now less than 3 minutes away. And above all of it, somewhere beyond the crushing layers of ruined stone and burning sky, the galaxy was watching. The crude distress petitions arriving at the system edge had multiplied again in the last 90 seconds. Voss saw them as tags flickering in his visor periphery whenever the tactical net refreshed, border colonies under raider pressure, caravan enclaves facing tribute fleets, one fractured moonstate transmitting nothing but casualty counts and a broken location string. None of them had any verified route to Earth. None of them knew whether humanity could reach them, whether humanity even existed beyond the battle now erupting over Vera's wake. But they were sending anyway. That was how quickly a myth became motion when despair was given the slightest evidence it had been lied to. Hope, Voss thought grimly, was moving faster than doctrine. A pulse from orbit cut through his feed. Admiral Saria Vale, face half-shadowed by the bridge glow, eyes colder than the fire building around her fleet. Status. We have Lyra Sen and approximately 60 surviving witnesses at the primary junction, Voss answered. Vault sealed. Enemy breach imminent. Can you extract civilians without opening it? Yes. Can you open it and still extract them? He looked down the trembling corridor where orange cutting light was beginning to leak through the advancing dust, listened to the distant percussion of Vorak breachers dismantling the Undercity one wall at a time, and gave the only answer command ever truly valued. Not without paying for it. Vale's gaze did not shift. You should know the full board, then. The outer Vorak fleet is completing constriction geometry. They are not trying to kill us quickly. They are forcing us to fight under maximum observation. Observer platforms from at least 17 non-aligned systems are now in long-range view. 3 council monitors are holding outside engagement range. And Threx Car is transmitting broad-spectrum claims that Earth has returned to establish protector dominion over weak worlds. Lyra looked up sharply at that, and even Holt stopped scanning for a beat. He wants to panic before proof, Voss said. He wants any victory we achieve to look like the first move of the Empire, Vale replied. And he has adjusted his final surface deployments accordingly. A second tactical layer opened across Voss's visor. The city above them bloomed in red and amber. Vorak ground formations were repositioning not around the archive districts now, but around the largest surviving refugee concentrations and evacuation lanes. Not random suppression. Theater. Threx Car was staging a final visible butchery in sectors where observer drones would have clear lines of sight. If humanity pulled too much force underground to protect the vault, the civilians above would die on camera. If humanity surged upward to save them all, the chamber below would be taken or buried. He was no longer simply fighting to win. He was designing a moral spectacle so vicious that any choice humans made could be twisted into either impotence or occupation. Then Vale delivered the part that mattered most. He has offered terms on open band, she said. Withdraw beyond the system edge, leave the witnesses and archives intact for Vorak review, and he will suspend further surface liquidation. Remain engaged, and he begins public extermination of the upper sectors while his fleet records every response. The chamber around Voss seemed to narrow. That was the breaking point proposition. Not military surrender. Moral extortion. Leave now, preserve concealment corridors, save the majority of your fleet, maybe even spare some lives in the short term. Or stay, fight, reveal more of what humanity can do, and accept that once this battle tips into open public memory there will be no returning to the quiet doctrine that had governed the last 68 years. We cannot trust his terms, Holt said almost angrily. He would review the archives, learn the pattern, then hunt every witness house still hidden. No, Lyra said with eerie calm. He would not merely hunt them. He would salt them from memory so thoroughly that future species would call our warnings superstition. Voss knew she was right. Predatory systems survived by monopolizing inevitability. If the vault died and the witnesses were broken, then every small civilization now whispering toward Earth would have its answer rewritten for it. No one comes. No one ever came. Submit early and die efficiently. The Marines at the tunnel mouth opened fire. The first Vorak breach team had emerged through the dust in a glitter of cutting sparks and collapsing stone. Human rifles thundered in the confined space, the sound so dense it felt physical. The lead enemy bodies folded almost instantly, but more crowded behind them, broad-framed and armored, driving forward with that disciplined brutality tyrannies loved, mass as certainty, force as language. The tunnel became a furnace of muzzle flare, ricochets, and pulverized masonry. One Marine shifted half a step, took a glancing plasma strike off the shoulder, and kept firing as if pain were an administrative inconvenience. Open it, Voss said. Holt did not ask for confirmation. She slammed a palm lattice against the seam and fed the silver-black inlay a sequence based on the witness symbols Lyra had already translated. For one impossible breath, nothing happened. Then the wall answered. The lines in the stone lit from within, not brightly, but with the low steady glow of something that had waited centuries without forgetting its purpose. A hidden mechanism groaned beneath their feet. Dust poured from the ceiling. The seam widened in silence rather than noise, as if the chamber beyond had been built by people who considered loud entrances a failure of thought. Cold air rolled out carrying the dry metallic scent of preservation and a faint trace of cedar-like resin that no one on Vera's wake should have been able to produce naturally. Inside, under layered shielding crystal and dark structural ribs, stood a chamber not filled with treasure, but instruction. No gold. No weapons cache. No coordinates to Earth. Rows of witness lattices ringed a central pillar engraved in both ancient local script and old human standard. Around it stood 12 preserved projection plates, each marked with the insignia of a different saved civilization. On the floor between them, etched deep enough to outlive flood, fire, and regime, was a phrase Holt translated aloud before she seemed to realize she was speaking. Protection is a bridge, not a throne. Lyra stepped into the doorway as the firefight raged behind them and looked not awed, but vindicated. I told you. You left instructions. Voss approached the central pillar. The old human standard was archaic but legible. What it contained struck harder than any battlefield revelation. The message was not to humanity. It was to those humanity had once saved. If you are reading this, we were here, and if we did our work correctly, we are gone again. We do not leave because your lives are worth less than our presence. We leave because if our shadow becomes your sky, your children will inherit dependence and call it safety. Build fleets. Build unions. Teach memory. Teach courage before crisis, not only during it. If predators return, answer one another faster than we answered you. For a moment even the gunfire at the tunnel mouth seemed distant. This was the true danger in the vault. Not evidence that humans had once rescued civilizations. Something far more subversive. Proof that the most powerful species in the known galaxy had refused to become permanent masters even when gratitude would have made it easy. Proof that protection, in humanity's own oldest surviving doctrine, was supposed to end in local strength, not eternal orbit. Every empire in history depended on the opposite principle. If the weak believed they could be protected without eventually being owned, then coercion lost one of its oldest masks. Another burst from orbit flashed into Voss's feed, Veil again, more urgent now. You need to hear this. Surface militia elements are rising. He switched overlays. In the city above, something unexpected was happening. The surviving civilians of Vera's wake were not merely fleeing toward human positions anymore. Across 3 districts, local defenders were reorganizing around archive wardens, engineers, and transit workers. Improvised barricades were forming. Captured Vorak shock tools were being redistributed. Human marines were not leading them like conquerors. They were anchoring lanes, teaching fields of fire, stabilizing choke points, and then letting the locals hold them. Under the eyes of the observer drones, the old lie that protection created helplessness was being challenged in real time. Humanity was not building clients. It was building resistance. Threk's car understood that too. A new open-band transmission forced itself through every local channel at once. The war executor's voice spread through the undercity, the city above, and the watching dark beyond. Unknown fleet, he said, and the calm in him was colder now because the trap was slipping. Observe your final mercy. Withdraw, and I permit these survivors to persist under managed order. Continue resisting, and I erase this city publicly while the galaxy learns what follows wherever your kind appears. Voss felt the offer for what it was, the last attempt to make humanity complicit in its own withdrawal. Leave now and the witnesses die slowly enough for politics to call it stabilization. Stay and you become the storm every fearful power warned against. He looked at Lyra. If we win here, there is no hiding again. She did not flinch. If you leave here, there will be less worth hiding for. Behind them, one of the Marines shouted a warning as the left tunnel mouth partially collapsed under a breach charge. 2 humans went down under stone, one rolled free, the other did not. The remaining line compressed without panic. In the narrow flare of weapons fire, Voss saw exactly what Threk's car could never understand. Humans were terrifying in war, but the core of that terror was not bloodlust. It was a refusal. Refusal to move from the line when someone smaller was behind you. Refusal to let arithmetic decide who counted as acceptable loss without contest. Refusal to obey the emotional logic of predators. He keyed the fleet channel. Admiral, the vault contains withdrawal doctrine. Not retreat. Transfer. You were right about gravity. If we stay as protectors, we become the center and everyone weakens around us. But that only matters if the worlds we help never learn to stand before we leave. Vale said nothing for a second. Then, very quietly, go on. We don't win this by saving Vera's wake for them. We win it by making sure Vera's wake is seen saving itself with us. We fight openly enough to break the Vorak and clear the city, but we do it as joint defense, not human occupation. Shared command lanes where possible. Local signals visible. Local resistance is visible. No symbols planted. No permanent shield declaration. We show the galaxy the old rule still stands. We answer, we fight, we leave people stronger. On the channel, somewhere behind Vale's measured silence, alarms continued to rise across the fleet. At last she said, "That path is harder." "Yes," Voss said. "It also means rejecting the easy version of victory. Total annihilation would be simpler and far more convincing to anyone watching." He looked at the pillar, at the ancient message from a humanity wise enough to fear its own shadow, and then at the survivors of Vera's wake preparing to move with archive cylinders in their arms while battle closed from both directions. "Then we choose harder," he said. For the first time since the mission began, Vale's reply carried something close to pride sharpened into command. "Understood. All units, revised doctrine is now in effect. Joint resistance authorization across all civilian sectors. Broadcast local command signatures where feasible. Break the fleet, break the siege, expose the crimes, and leave nothing in our behavior that resembles a throne." Above them, the battle for Vera's wake tilted toward its final shape. Below, the witnesses began carrying the vault's projection plates into portable cradles so they would survive even if the chamber did not. And across the system, with enemy fleets massing, observer drones recording, and desperate worlds already turning their damaged antennas toward Earth, humanity stepped up to the edge of irreversible visibility and chose not just how it would win, but what kind of power it refused to become once the winning was done. The final battle for Vera's wake did not begin with a triumphant charge. It began with thousands of separate decisions made almost at once by people who had been told all their lives that survival meant kneeling early. Above the planet, Admiral Saria Vale broke Ash Lantern Group out of its tightening defensive shell with a maneuver no Council Navy would have attempted and no Vorak tactician had truly believed humans would risk under observation. Instead of concentrating every ship around the lead cruisers and presenting a centralized wall of force, she shattered the fleet into interlocking attack pairs, medical screens, local defense spokes, and fast-response lances that moved like a living storm around the wounded planet. To outside eyes it looked dangerously decentralized, almost reckless. To human crews, and to the newly armed defenders below, it was something else. It was trust made tactical. Each unit knew its lane, its burden, its fallback, and the exact point at which its role shifted from rescue to empowerment. The Vorak had prepared to cage a single beast. What met them instead was a system-wide refusal to stay in one shape long enough to be trapped. On the surface, the effect was even more dramatic. Human Marines did not herd the civilians of Vera's wake behind armored walls and tell them to wait for liberation. They opened armories, taught kill angles in alleyways, handed local engineers demolition authority over approach routes, and rerouted tactical data through surviving civic relay towers so that neighborhood defenders could see the battle as it unfolded over their own streets. At first the change was almost invisible. A human squad fell back from a plaza not because it had lost ground, but because local wardens were ready to hold the line. A medic stabilizing a transit worker, then pointing him toward a field station already staffed by his own people. A young defender with ash on her face and a captured Vorak cutter directing evac movement from a shattered balcony while two humans anchored the avenue beneath her and obeyed her route priorities because she knew the district better than they ever could. Under the observer drones gathering at the edge of the burning sky, the old imperial equation began to fail in public. Protection was not turning the saved into dependents. It was turning them back into participants. War Executor Threx Carr understood the danger of that more quickly than anyone. His final push came not from desperation, but from ideological rage. Every fleet order he gave now aimed at restoring the one image predators needed the galaxy to believe, that when great violence arrived, the weak could only survive beneath permanent domination. Vorak line breakers dove lower, ignoring damage that would have made sane admirals reconsider, just to burn visible sectors where civilians and humans were fighting side by side. Surface kill teams were ordered to bypass tactical advantages if they could instead butcher archive carriers in open avenues. He no longer cared about preserving witness lattices for study. He cared about shattering the symbolism before it escaped him. But that was the moment the battle turned against him permanently, because symbolism was exactly where humanity had become strongest. The projection plates from the deep vault were no longer hidden under stone. Lyra Sen and Rana Holt had split the chamber's record into portable lattice bursts and transmitted them across every intact local relay they could reach. Ancient testimony flooded the system. Worlds once saved and then left free. Human commanders refused tribute. Civilizations were told to build one another before they built shrines. The phrase from the pillar, "Protection is a bridge, not a throne," spread through the Undercity, across the surface, into the observer feeds, and outward into the long dark where frightened species had already begun whispering toward Earth. Suddenly Threx Carr was no longer fighting rumors with fear. He was fighting documented memory with atrocity, and every fresh act of brutality only made the contrast sharper. In orbit, the Vorak fleet finally overcommit. Trying to crush the decentralized human formation and restore control over the skies, they drove inward in dense assault wedges, each one designed to break through by mass and terror. Vale had been waiting for exactly that mistake. Human ships, smaller and denser, did what heavy world engineering had always allowed them to do better than almost anyone else. They changed velocity like violence had a mind of its own. Cruisers that should have been cornered folded sideways through impossibly tight vectors, forcing Vorak spearheads to overshoot into crossfire. Escort darts skimmed along the gravity ripples of larger hulls and punched through shield seams already stressed by kinetic saturation. Medical carriers that should have fled stayed just inside the engagement envelope long enough to pull burning escape pods from vacuum before vanishing behind tungsten chaff storms. And at the center of the chaos, the Mercy of Dawn, never meant to be a warship at all, opened its hidden spinal batteries only when Threx Carr's command vessel tried to descend for a final terror strike over the civilian sectors. The first shot took out his forward shield veil. The second shattered the command barge's port engine cluster. The third left the war executor dead in space above the world he had meant to turn into a lesson. Below, the ground war unraveled just as fast. The Vorak had expected civilians to scatter when lines broke. Instead, districts they thought pacified rose in disciplined waves. Archive wardens led evac columns through routes humans had reopened but could not possibly have navigated alone. Mining crews collapsed pursuit tunnels on enemy armor. Children too young to carry rifles carried signal batteries and water between barricades while elders used old city maps to route human squads around kill pockets and into flanking positions. It was not a miraculous transformation into invincible heroes. People still died. Streets still burned. Human marines still threw themselves into gunfire when the line demanded it. But the texture of the battle changed irreversibly. Vera's wake was no longer a population being saved. It was a civilization refusing to stay dead while humanity bought it the time and space to remember how. By the time the last organized Vorak ships tried to flee, the outcome no longer belonged to one fleet alone. Observer drones captured the surrender requests in full. Captured planetary feeds showed surviving Vorak officers throwing down weapons before local defenders, not human occupiers. The war machine did not collapse simply because its hulls were broken, though many were. It collapsed because the public logic sustaining it had failed in real time. Threx Carr had promised the galaxy that predators ruled by making the helpless choose a stronger master. Instead, every camera in the system had just watched the most feared predators in known history arrive, fight like apocalyptic creatures, and still refuse the throne lying open beneath their feet. When the firing finally slowed, Admiral Vale declined every recommendation for a Terran military administration over Vera's wake. No banners were planted over the ruins. No protector taxes, no orbital annexation, no declaration that this world now lived under Earth's permanent shield. Human engineers helped restore power. Human medics stabilized the worst of the wounded. Human crews dismantled Vorak weapons grids in orbit and turned evidence of genocide over to a provisional witness council formed by Lyra Sen and the surviving civic houses. Then, just as the oldest record said they would, humans began preparing to leave. That was the part that broke people hardest. Not because it felt cold. Because it proved the archive had been true all along. When Lyra addressed the surviving districts from the shattered Central Forum, with human ships still hanging above the atmosphere like dark stars and smoke rising through the violet dusk, her voice carried through a city that had expected extinction and found responsibility instead. "They answered," she said, looking not at the sky but at her own people. "Now our duty begins." There was no grand speech from humanity after that. No demand for tribute, no call to worship, no promise to become the axis around which every frightened world could stop building courage for itself. Only one message was released into the wider dark, short enough to travel far and simple enough that even broken civilizations could understand it. If the next distress call comes, answer faster than the galaxy answered us. And across known space, where hidden transmitters, desperate colonies, and frightened witness houses had already started turning their damaged antennas toward Earth, hope did not become dependence. It became a question no empire could comfortably hear ever again.